I once believed family was sacred. Then, after one of our weekly calls, my son Mark forgot to hang up, and I heard the truth. "Did she fall for it?" my granddaughter Lila asked, her voice unmistakably clear. "Hook, line, and sinker," Mark replied, his tone cold with contempt. "I'm so tired of pretending to care about her silly garden club." Then my grandson Ethan added, "Once we get her to sign over the house, we can move her somewhere cheap." My only child laughed. Mom's too clueless to see what's really happening. I sat there, frozen at my kitchen table, my teacup halfway to my lips, as 5 years of vague suspicions suddenly sharpened into terrible clarity. That night, I blocked their numbers. The next morning, I canceled their credit cards. By the end of the week, I'd called my attorney. When they showed up at my door, frantic and demanding answers, I didn't respond. Family isn't just about blood. At 78, I'm finally living for myself, painting my sunlit apartment in colors I choose. Before we go on, if you find strength in stories about resilience, subscribe to Tales for Her for more stories that honor the silent strength within us all. Leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Have you ever overheard someone's true feelings when they thought you weren't listening? Share your story below. How did you respond to unexpected betrayal? I remember the day everything changed as if it were yesterday. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping chamomile tea when my phone rang. It was Mark, calling for our weekly check-in. At 78, I'd grown used to these routine calls. They weren't exactly warm, but they were regular, a thread connecting me to the family I hardly saw anymore. "Hello, Mark," I answered, trying to hide the hope in my voice. "Hey, Mom," he replied, distracted as always. "How are you feeling today?" We chatted about nothing much. The weather, my garden club, his children's latest accomplishments. It was pleasant enough, surface-level conversation we'd perfected over the years. I told him about the new roses I'd planted, how Mrs. Porter, from 2 doors down, had complimented my yard. He made the right noises, though I could hear him typing in the background. "And how are the paintings coming along?" he asked, a question he always remembered to include, though he hadn't seen any of my watercolors in over a year. "Just lovely," I said. "I'm working on a series of landscapes from the park. My art teacher says I have a good eye for composition." "That's great, Mom. Really great." The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. As always, I filled it with questions about his work, about Rachel, about the grandchildren. His answers grew shorter with each one. Since Henry passed, my life had grown so quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to grow louder every year. I'd taken to leaving the television on for background noise, though I rarely watched it. The garden club on Tuesdays and my watercolor. Class on Thursdays were the highlights of my weak, bright spots of connection in the long stretch of empty days. My little rancho was tidy and comfortable, but sometimes in the evenings, I'd find myself wandering from room to room, touching Henry's things, his reading glasses still on the nightstand, his favorite sweater I couldn't bear to part with. The silence would close in, and I'd put on one of our old records, dancing alone in the living room to the songs we once loved. "Mom, are you still there?" Mark's voice pulled me back. "Yes, sorry, dear. Just thinking about what to make for dinner." "You're eating properly, right? Not just tea and toast?" "Of course," I lied. Sometimes cooking for one hardly seemed worth the effort. "Good. Well, I should get going. Conference call in 5 minutes." "Of course, dear. Same time next week?" "Sure thing, Mom. Take care of yourself." The call ended, and I sat there holding the phone for a long moment, as if some warmth might still linger. I sighed and returned to my tea, now lukewarm, Outside, the afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across my small garden. Another day nearly done. I hadn't always been this lonely. There was a time when this house, well, not this house, but our home, was filled with laughter and noise. Sunday dinners with Mark, Rachel, and the grandchildren had been chaotic, with Henry at the grill and everyone talking over each other. Lila had been such a sweet child, always bringing me dandelions from the yard. Ethan followed his grandfather everywhere, learning how to use tools and fix things. But that was before cancer took Henry, before the silence, before my family became voices on a phone instead of bodies around my table. I rinsed my teacup and glanced at the calendar. Garden club tomorrow. Something to look forward to, at least. I'd wear my blue cardigan, the one Zinea said brought out my eyes. Maybe afterward we'd get lunch at that little cafe on Main Street. My sister was good about checking in on me, though at 83 she had her own health concerns to manage. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My hair, now silver and cut into a neat bob, framed a face marked by years of loss. Around my neck hung Hector's wedding ring, on a delicate chain, a small comfort since he passed. Sometimes I'd whisper, "Just you and me now," to my reflection, a habit I'd picked up in the quiet years after Hector was gone. Talking to myself had become the only conversation I had some days. Hector's diagnosis had struck like lightning on a clear day stage for pancreatic cancer, with maybe 6 months or a year if we were lucky. We'd been planning a cruise to Alaska for our 50th anniversary, but instead those months were spent in and out of hospitals, learning medical terms no one should ever have to know, watching the strongest man I'd ever loved fade before my eyes. Mark was supportive at first, visiting regularly and bringing the grandchildren to lift their grandfather's spirits. Rachel organized a meal train with their church group, but as the months dragged on and Hector's condition worsened, their visits became less frequent. "The kids have school," they'd say. "Work is crazy right now." I understood life goes on, even when it feels like your own has come to a halt. In the last weeks, Hector was barely conscious, the morphine keeping the worst pain at bay. I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed, holding his hand, telling him stories from our life together, reminiscing about meeting at that USO dance in '62, his uniform so crisp, my dress so blue. He told me, "You were the prettiest girl there." His voice a faint echo of the baritone I'd loved. "Still are." When he slipped away that early morning, I was dozing in the chair, still holding his hand. I sensed the moment he was gone. The nurse said it was peaceful, that he hadn't suffered. I wanted to believe her. Hector's funeral was well attended. He'd been beloved in the community. Mark gave a touching eulogy. Rachel handled the reception, and the grandchildren, now teenagers, seemed unsure around me. Mark promised, "We'll check on you every day, Mom. You won't be alone." For a while he kept his word, but daily calls faded to weekly, and Sunday dinners gradually stopped. "We're taking the kids to the lake, Mom. Rachel's parents are in town. Ethan has a tournament." Life went on. I rattled around in our big house, meant for a family, not a solitary woman. The stairs and yard work became too much, and property taxes ate into my income. Mark suggested downsizing. "You don't need all this space, Mom. The equity would give you a nice nest egg." The house sold quickly, and I found a cozy rancher with a manageable garden. Mark helped with the move, sorting what to keep and donate. "What will you do with the proceeds?" he asked. "Put it in savings, I suppose." Mark frowned. "That's not strategic. Interest rates are terrible. maybe invest or consider a reverse mortgage. I promised to think about it. The move was exhausting but freeing. Downsizing meant letting go of a lifetime's possessions. But my new home had its charms. A bay window for reading, a modern kitchen, and a garden shed I turned into a studio. I settled into a new routine, a chapter I never planned for, but learned to embrace. Mark seemed relieved. "This is much more manageable for you, Mom. If you need help, we're just a call away." I believed him. Then one Tuesday, Mark called, instead of Sunday. "Mom, have you updated your will since Dad passed?" The question caught me off guard. "No. Why?" "It's just good practice. I know an attorney who specializes in elder law." "Elder law? I'm not elderly, just experienced." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "It's smart to have everything in order. I can set up an appointment." I said I'd think about it, but the conversation left me uneasy. A week later, Rachel called, something she rarely did. "Just checking in on my favorite mother-in-law," she said brightly. "Mark mentioned you might be feeling under the weather." That surprised me. I hadn't mentioned any health concerns. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood. How are you feeling? Taking your medications? Eating well?" Her questions kept coming, probing into my daily routine, health, and even my finances. By the end, I felt more interrogated than cared for. Soon after, the grandchildren started visiting. Lila, now 22, arrived all smiles and compliments. We had tea in the garden, catching up on her life. She'd dropped out of community college and was between jobs. As she left, she hesitated. "Grandma, I hate to ask, but I'm in a tight spot. Could you help me out? $5,000 would cover my rent and expenses while I job hunt." It was a lot, but she was my granddaughter, and she reminded me of Mark at that age. I wrote the check, feeling needed. 2 weeks later, I saw her in town, arms full of shopping bags and a new, expensive hairstyle. She didn't see me. Ethan came next, bringing a business proposal. At 25, he had his father's charm. "It's a tech startup, Grandma. We're developing an app to revolutionize grocery shopping. The return could be huge." "That sounds impressive," I said, though I didn't understand much. "But I don't know anything about investing in startups." "That's why you have me," he said, patting my hand. $10,000 gets you in at the ground floor. You could double your money." I wrote the check, telling myself it was an investment in his future. 6 months later, when I asked Mark about Ethan's business, he looked confused. "Oh, that didn't work out. High risk, high reward." The next time I saw Ethan, he was driving a new sports car. Around this time, I met Milos at a community center dance. He asked me to dance to a Frank Sinatra song, and his old-world charm was instantly captivating. 75, a retired engineer. From Serbia, his accent was thick, his eyebrows bushy, and his laugh infectious. "You dance like a much younger woman," he told me, making me blush for the first time in years. Milos asked for my number, and I gave it. Our first date was a matinee at the old theater, followed by coffee at a cafe, where he knew the owner, another Serbian expatriate. Milos told me about his late wife, his children out west, and his life in Belgrade. I shared about Henry, my painting, and my garden. We discovered a shared love of classical music and documentaries. He became a regular part of my life museum visits on Wednesdays, dinner at his condo or mine on Saturdays, day trips to coastal towns I'd never explored. For the first time since Henry died, I felt truly alive again, seen for who I was, not just as a widow. When I mentioned Milos to Mark during one of our calls, his reaction was immediate and unsettling. "Mom, You barely know this guy. How much have you told him about your finances?" "Nothing," I replied, surprised. "Why would I? We talk about art, music, travel, not money." "You need to be careful," Mark insisted. "There are a lot of scammers out there who target seniors. Lonely widows with savings are prime targets." "Milos isn't like that," I protested. "He owns his condo outright and has a good pension from his engineering career." "He's not interested in my money." But Mark's warning planted a seed of doubt I just couldn't shake. The next time Milos and I had dinner, I caught myself searching for any sign that his interest in me might be about money. But there was nothing, just the lingering doubt Mark had planted. Still, that shadow hovered over my happiness. Meanwhile, my sister Zanaya watched my family's sudden involvement with growing concern. "They never visited this much when Henry was alive," she remarked during one of our lunches. "Now suddenly, they're all so interested in your well-being." I defended them, insisting they were just being caring family. But Zanaya, 5 years older and twice as sharp, gave me a look that said she wasn't convinced. "Just be careful, Viv. Not everyone has your best interests at heart, even family." I brushed off her worries as the cynicism of age. But as the months passed, a pattern began to emerge that was hard to ignore. Mark and Rachel's attitude toward Milos shifted from concern to outright hostility. They started dropping by unannounced when they knew he'd be visiting, creating awkward moments until he'd politely excuse himself. "We just worry about you, Mom," Mark would say after Milos left. "You don't really know this man." I tried to reassure them. "He's kind and respectful. We enjoy each other's company." But Rachel would add, "Men his age are only after one thing, and it's not conversation." I was stunned. I'm 78. I think I'm past being taken advantage of that way. The comments continued, subtle digs about Milos's accent, his background, and his intentions. Mark would call with urgent needs whenever Milos and I had plans, and Rachel would schedule lunches that conflicted with our outings, forcing me to choose. When Mark finally suggested my relationship with this foreigner disrespected Henry's memory, I broke down. "Your father would want me to be happy," I said through tears. "Dad would want you to be safe," Mark replied. In the end, I chose peace over happiness and ended things with Milos. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. "They're wrong about me," he said quietly. "But I understand. Family is important. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." With Milos gone, my world shrank to my home, my garden club, and my increasingly demanding family. The grandchildren's visits always ended with requests: money for car repairs, graduate school applications, security deposits. I gave what I could, telling myself that's what grandmothers do. Rachel began admiring my possessions during visits: Henry's pearl necklace, my mother's silver tea service, our wedding crystal vase. "This would look perfect in our dining room," she'd say, holding each treasure. Bit by bit, my precious belongings migrated to their home. I rationalized it. They'd inherit these things eventually. Mark's hints about financial trouble became more direct. "Ethan's tuition is stretching us thin. The house needs a new roof." I wrote checks for their expenses, each time receiving less gratitude and more expectation. Zanaya watched with alarm. "Viv, they're bleeding you dry," she said bluntly. "When was the last time they visited without asking for something?" "They're family," I repeated, clinging to the idea that family helps each other. "Family doesn't take advantage," she countered. "Henry would be furious." I changed the subject, but in the quiet moments alone in my increasingly bare house, I wondered if she might be right. The months after breaking up with Milos were intensely lonely. I threw myself into painting, spending hours in my garden shed, studio, pouring out emotions I couldn't voice. Mark's calls increased, always ending with financial matters. "Maybe we should consolidate your accounts, Mom. Rachel and I could help manage things." I started to feel like I was disappointing them by insisting on my independence. Rachel began monitoring my medication, suggesting I needed help remembering pills or perhaps someone to check on me daily. "I'm perfectly capable of taking my own medications," I insisted. "There's no shame in accepting help at your age," she replied, her tone patronizing. The grandchildren's visits became predictable. Lila would compliment my baking, then mention she was short on rent. Ethan would help with small repairs, then bring up his car trouble or credit card debt. Each time I wrote a check, feeling briefly needed, but my savings shrank while their lives improved. New kitchens, cars, vacations. Ethan posted photos from Cancun. Lila arrived with designer handbags. I started cutting back on my own comforts, skipping lunches with Zenaya, canceling my symphony subscription, shopping at discount stores. Zenaya became blunt. "They show up with empty hands and leave with full pockets." I tried to defend them, but she asked, "Have they ever paid you back?" The truth was they hadn't. Money only flowed one way. I began to see the pattern. My family always arrived empty-handed but never left that way. The internal conflict was exhausting, a constant battle between my instinct to provide and the growing awareness I was being used. I thought of Milos's blunt words. "You are being, how do you say it, milked like cow." At first I was offended, but now I wondered if he was the only one honest enough to say it. One afternoon I found a photo of Mark as a child, smiling with pride beside Henry. I stared at it, struggling to reconcile the loving boy I remembered with the calculating man he'd become. The stress was wearing me down: weight loss, insomnia, anxiety. During a rare lunch, Zenaya looked at me and said, "You look exhausted. This is killing you by inches." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "They're my only family besides you. That doesn't give them the right to bleed you dry. Henry would never have allowed this." "Henry isn't here," I said quietly, "and I'm not as strong as he was." "Nonsense. You're every bit as strong. You just need to remember it." Something shifted in me. If they were using me, it wasn't my fault. I hadn't failed as a mother. I was being exploited by people who valued money over love. I started saying no to financial requests. "I'm afraid I can't help with that right now." Their reactions were telling. Confusion, irritation, then anger. "But Grandma, you've always helped before," Lila protested. "My circumstances have changed. I need to be careful with my spending." The calls dwindled. The visits nearly stopped. Mark, however, became more persistent, offering to stay and help. I deflected, quietly researching financial protections and consulting with Zenaya's lawyer friend, preparing for whatever came next, either giving in or forcing them to show their true intentions. One Wednesday, Mark called outside our usual schedule. I was in my studio working on a watercolor and almost let it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. "Hello, Mark," I answered, hiding my weariness. "Hey, Mom," he replied, unusually upbeat. We chatted about nothing: the weather, my garden club, his kids' latest achievements. But I sensed a barely contained excitement in his voice. Finally, he got to the point. "Oh, by the way, Mom, we're planning a special dinner next week for Ethan's birthday." You'll come, won't you?" I was surprised. It had been months since I'd been invited to a family gathering. "Of course," I said, genuinely pleased. "What can I bring?" "Just yourself," Mark said quickly. "We're taking care of everything. It's at that new steakhouse downtown, the one Ethan's been wanting to try." "That sounds lovely," I replied, already thinking about what I could afford for a gift. My budget was tight, but a birthday was a birthday. Maybe a nice shirt or a book on history. "Oh, and Mom," Mark added, slipping into that particular tone I recognized. A little hesitant, a little apologetic, always the prelude to a financial request. "Hate to ask, but could you transfer about $300 to Rachel's account? The caterers need a deposit and we're a bit short this month." I frowned, confused. "I thought you said it was at the steakhouse." "Yes," he said quickly. "They have a private room for parties. That's what needs the deposit." It didn't quite add up. Restaurants usually just need a credit card, not a cash deposit, but I let it go. "Of course, Davy," I said, using his childhood nickname. "I'll send it right now. Thanks, Mom. You're a gem. Love you." "Love you too, dear." I heard him move as if to hang up, but the call didn't end. Instead, I heard shuffling, then voices growing clearer, as if he'd set the phone down without disconnecting. Did she fall for it? Lila's voice, unmistakable, was followed by a laugh that chilled me. "Hook, line, and sinker," Mark replied, his tone cold. "I'm so tired of pretending to care about her garden club and those pathetic paintings." "Keep it up," Rachel added sharply. "The birthday dinner will be perfect. She'll come, bring cash. You know how she is." Ethan chimed in. "We can push the reverse mortgage again," Dad says with pressure. "She'll cave." "Yeah, Dad's smart," Lila agreed. "Once she signs over the house, we'll move her somewhere cheap. She doesn't need all that space." Mark's voice turned businesslike. "We just need to be patient. The retirement account and Henry's insurance will set us up. Mom's too stupid to see what's happening. Always has been. Just like Dad said, weak and easily manipulated." I sat frozen, teacup halfway to my lips, as years of suspicion suddenly became undeniable truth. The family I loved had been using me all along. To them, I was just a checkbook, to be drained and discarded. The realization hit me like a blow, leaving me breathless. I ended the call with trembling hands, but their laughter echoed in my mind. As darkness fell, my teacup grew cold, and I tried to process the betrayal, moving through a grief that felt both familiar and painfully new. This was a different kind of loss, the death of illusions, of the family I thought I had, of the love I believed in. The pain was deeper than anything I'd known. I questioned everything. What had I done to deserve such contempt? Was I a terrible mother, a disappointment? Or was this just who they truly were? The questions swirled as the house grew quiet, the only sound Hector's old clock a heartbeat from our life together. What would Hector do? The thought brought clarity. He would never allow himself to be used. He would protect what we built, not just the money, but the love and sacrifice behind it. As dawn crept in, I knew what I had to do. I spent that night motionless, the betrayal weighing on my chest, realizing this grief was both like and unlike, losing Hector. When Hector died, I lost someone who loved me unconditionally. Now, I was losing people I thought loved me, only to realize their affection was always conditional based on what I could provide, what I was worth in dollars and cents. The struggle was agonizing. These weren't strangers. They were my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law, the people I had loved, nurtured, sacrificed for. How could I reconcile the Mark who sat by my hospital bed after surgery, holding my hand and reading to me, with the man who now called me stupid and weak behind my back? How could I square the memory of Lila as a little girl bringing me dandelions, and handmade cards with the young woman who laughed about manipulating her grandmother? Part of me wanted to call them back, to demand an explanation, to ask how they could treat me with such callous disregard. But another part, perhaps the wiser part, knew that confrontation would only lead to denials, gaslighting, and claims that I'd misheard or misunderstood. This required a different approach strategy, not emotion. I needed to be stronger than I had been in years. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor, I made my decision. I would protect myself, my resources, my dignity. I would not let them take anything more from me. Not my money, not my home, not my self-respect. The first call I made was to Zinaya. Despite the early hour, she answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert. My sister had always been an early riser. "Viv, is everything all right?" "No," I said simply. And then the words poured out, everything I'd overheard, every cruel comment, every calculated plan to separate me from my assets. As I spoke, my voice grew steadier, my resolve stronger. Naming the betrayal out loud somehow lessened its power over me. Zinaya was silent for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." She arrived within the hour, coffee in hand, and her trademark no-nonsense attitude in tow. At 83, my sister was still a force of nature, her white hair cut in a stylish bob, her posture military straight, despite the arthritis that plagued her on rainy days. "I should have listened to you," I said, tears finally flowing as she pulled me into a fierce hug. "You saw it all along." "Doesn't matter now," she said briskly, setting down her purse and the cardboard tray of coffee cups. "What matters is what we do next." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd received the devastating call, and made a plan. Zinnia had always been the practical one, the strategist to my dreamer. Now, her clarity was exactly what I needed. "First things first," she said, pulling a notepad and pen from her purse. "We need to protect your assets immediately. What access does Mark have to your accounts?" I explained about the shared access I'd given him to monitor my accounts, the credit cards where I'd made them authorized users, and the joint checking account we'd set up for emergencies. Zinaya made notes, her handwriting as precise as ever. "All of that needs to be changed today. Right now, if possible." "But what will I tell them?" I asked, still tangled in the web of family obligation, still worried about hurting their feelings despite everything. "Nothing yet," Zinaya said firmly. "We secure your finances first, then decide how to handle the confrontation." She took my hands in hers, her blue eyes so like mine, so like our mother's, holding my gaze. "Your kindness isn't weakness. It's their loss, not yours. We're going to fix this together." Her confidence in me was a lifeline, and I clung to it, drawing strength from her certainty when my own was in tatters. "Okay," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Tell me what to do." The next few days passed in a blur. First, I called my bank and canceled all the shared access I had given Mark. The customer service representative was helpful, but concerned. "Are you sure you want to remove your son from all these accounts? He's been authorized for quite some time." "I'm quite sure," I said firmly. "In fact, I'd like to open entirely new accounts and transfer my funds there. And I'd like to change all my passwords and security questions." Next, I called the credit card companies where I'd made them authorized users and revoked their privileges. One representative asked if there had been fraudulent charges I wanted to report. No, I said after a moment's thought. Not fraudulent exactly. Just unauthorized in spirit, if not in letter. I blocked their numbers on my phone, changed my email password, and made an appointment with my own attorney, not Mark's friend, but Janet Kowalski, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had handled Zanaya's affairs for years. During our consultation, Janet explained that financial exploitation of seniors is unfortunately common, especially when it's family members who have access, trust, and often a sense of entitlement. What can I do to protect myself? I asked. Quite a lot, actually, she replied, pulling out a legal pad. We'll start by creating a revocable trust for your assets, with clear provisions for your care. We'll update your will, removing Mark as executor, and naming someone you trust implicitly, perhaps your sister. We'll set up a financial power of attorney and healthcare directive, naming someone other than your son. And we'll document this conversation and the reasons for these changes in case there's ever a challenge to your competency. The implication was clear. Mark might try to claim I was mentally incompetent when he discovered he'd been cut off. The thought was both infuriating and deeply sad that my own son would question my sanity rather than acknowledge his own wrongdoing. Spoke volumes about how far our relationship had deteriorated. When the day of Ethan's birthday dinner arrived, I wasn't there. I sent no gift, no card, no explanation for my absence. Instead, I was touring retirement communities with Zanaya, not the affordable assisted living facility Mark had mentioned, but vibrant, active communities where I could have my independence and security. This one has an art studio for residents, the tour guide at Oakwood Village mentioned, showing us a bright, airy space with easels and a wall of completed paintings. Several professional artists live here, and they offer classes for all skill levels. I felt a spark of interest, the first positive emotion I'd felt since the devastating phone call. Do they have exhibitions? I asked. Gallery showings. Twice a year, the guide confirmed. And they partner with the community college for special workshops. Many residents find they have more time to pursue their artistic passions here. By the end of the day, I had put down a deposit on a one-bedroom apartment with a small den that could serve as a studio. The community had 24-hour security, a dining room for when I didn't feel like cooking, transportation to medical appointments and shopping, and most importantly, a sense of community that had been missing from my life since Henry died. Are you sure about this? Zanaya asked as we drove home. It's a big change. I'm sure, I said, feeling more certain with each passing mile. I need a fresh start, somewhere they can't find me easily, somewhere I can build a new life. The emergency call started that night. First Mark, then Rachel, then even Ethan and Lila. Voicemails, text messages, emails, all pleading confusion, claiming misunderstanding. When I didn't respond, they started showing up at my house, knocking on my door at all hours. I stayed with Zanaya until the moving van came. We hired a security service to oversee the packing and moving, just in case Mark or anyone else tried to interfere. They didn't, but Mark's car drove slowly past Zanaya's house several times during my stay, a silent reminder that this wasn't over. I called a realtor and put my house on the market, determined to sell on my own terms. Once it sold, I placed the money into the carefully structured trusts Janet had set up, with clear provisions for my care and strict instructions about who could and could not access the funds. The hardest part was changing my phone number and email address, essentially disappearing from the life I had known. But it was necessary. As Janet explained, sometimes the only way to stop financial exploitation is to remove yourself completely from the exploiter's reach. I left no forwarding address, no easy way for them to find me. It felt extreme, but after hearing their true feelings and intentions, I knew it was the only way to protect myself, both financially and emotionally. The day I moved into Oakwood Village was bittersweet. Zinea helped me arrange my furniture, hang my paintings, and set up my new studio space. The apartment was smaller than my house, but perfectly adequate for my needs. The east-facing windows in the living room were ideal for morning painting sessions. "You'll be happy here," Zinaya said, as we shared a cup of tea on my new balcony, watching residents working among the flower beds below. "I can feel it." "I think so too," I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility, a future that belonged to me alone, not defined by what others wanted or expected from me. That night, alone in my new home, I cried for what I had lost, not the money or possessions, but the illusion of family, the belief that I was loved for who I was, rather than what I could provide. It was a necessary grieving, a letting go of what had never really existed except in my hopeful imagination. But as I unpacked my painting supplies and set up my easel by the east-facing window, I felt something else growing alongside the grief, a quiet determination, a sense of reclaiming my life on my own terms. I was 78 years old, but I wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. My new apartment in the retirement village faced east, perfect for morning painting sessions. The light streamed in through the large windows, illuminating my easel and the canvas I was working on. A landscape of the garden visible from my balcony, the colors vibrant and alive, in a way my earlier work never quite achieved. It's been 6 months since I disappeared from my old life, 6 months of rebuilding, healing, and discovering who I am when I'm not defined by my relationships to others. Not as Henry's wife, not as Mark's mother, not as Lila and Ethan's grandmother, but simply as myself, Vivian Harmon, artist, gardener, survivor. The transition wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake questioning my decision, wondering if I had overreacted, if there might have been some innocent explanation for what I'd overheard. But those moments became less frequent as I settled into my new life. As I built new routines, new friendships, new purposes, I reconnected with Milos, who, as it turned out, took a dance class here 3 times a week. Our reunion was awkward. At first, me full of apologies for ending things so abruptly, him gracious but wary. But gradually, we rebuilt our connection, stronger now for having weathered a separation. We're taking things slowly, enjoying each other's company without pressure or expectations. He makes me laugh, challenges my thinking, and appreciates my art in a way few others ever have. "You paint like someone who has seen both beauty and pain," he told me once, studying a landscape I'd just completed. "There is honesty in your brushstrokes." I've made new friends, too. Margaret, a retired English professor who leads the book club. Carlos, a widower who tends the community garden and shares his vegetables with anyone interested. Elaine, a former ballet dancer, who now teaches gentle yoga to residents. They know nothing of my past, or the betrayal that led me here. To them, I'm just Vivian, the new resident with a talent for watercolors and a fondness for Earl Grey tea. The financial protections I put in place have proven necessary. Mark found me eventually. Of course he did. He's my son. He knows my habits and preferences. He showed up at Oakwood Village one afternoon, charm dialed up, a bouquet of lilies my favorite in hand. "Mom," he said when I met him in the community center rather than inviting him to my apartment. "We've been so worried. Why did you disappear like that? Why won't you return our calls?" I looked at my son, my only child, the baby I'd nursed and nurtured, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and tie his shoes, the man I'd helped through college and his first apartment, and felt a complex mixture of love and weariness. "I think you know why, Mark," I said quietly. "I don't," he insisted, his expression a perfect mask of confusion and concern. "We've been frantic. Rachel's been beside herself. The kids keep asking when they'll see their grandma again," Mark said, but I looked at him and replied simply, "You forgot to hang up the phone." "After you asked me for money for Ethan's birthday dinner, I heard everything. You, Rachel, the kids. I heard what you really think of me, what you've been planning." His face shifted through shock, denial, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned acknowledgement. "Mom, you misunderstood. We were just—" "Please don't," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the pain in my heart. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying to me now. I heard you call me stupid and weak. I heard your plans for my house, my retirement account, Henry's insurance money. I heard it all, Mark." He was silent for a long moment, fidgeting with the cellophane around the lilies. "We're family," he said at last, as if that explained everything, as if it excused everything. "Yes, we are," I agreed. "Which is why it hurt so much to hear how you really feel about me. Family should be about love, respect, support, not exploitation. We do love you," he protested, but even to my own ears it sounded hollow, a reflex rather than a real declaration. "Perhaps," I conceded, "but not enough to treat me with dignity, with basic human respect. Not enough to see me as a person rather than a resource." "What do you want from me, Mom?" he asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. We all are. Now can we move past this? Come home, we miss you." "I am home," I said, gesturing to the community center around us, the garden visible through the large windows. "This is where I live now. As for what I want from you, nothing, Mark. I don't want or need anything from you." The shock on his face was almost comical. The idea that I might not need him, might not be desperate for his attention and approval, had clearly never occurred to him. "You can't be serious," he said. "You're just going to cut us off? Your own family?" "I'm not cutting you off," I clarified. "I'm establishing boundaries. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on new terms. Terms that include mutual respect and honesty. No more financial requests, no more manipulation, no more treating me like I'm incompetent or stupid." "And if we don't agree to these terms?" he challenged, a hint of that hardness I'd heard in his voice during that fateful phone call slipping through. "Then we don't have a relationship," I said simply. "It's your choice." He left without resolving anything, the lilies abandoned on the table between us. I haven't heard from him directly since, though Rachel called once, her voice syrupy with false concern, asking if I was getting the help I need. Ethan sent a text suggesting we talk about what's really going on. Lila left a voicemail full of tears and accusations about how I'd abandoned the family. I didn't respond to any of them. The ball is in their court now. If they want a genuine relationship based on love rather than financial gain, they know where to find me. I'm not holding my breath, but I've left the door open a crack just in case. Sometimes I think about them, Mark and his family. I wonder if they ever truly loved me, or if I was always just a resource to be managed, a checkbook with a heartbeat. I hope the grandchildren might someday become better people than their parents, might recognize the emptiness of a life built on taking rather than giving. But I don't wait by the phone anymore. Instead, I focus on the life I'm building here. I've joined a more serious art group and even sold a few paintings at the community's biannual exhibition. I've started volunteering at the local elementary school, teaching art to third graders who approach their canvases with unself-conscious joy. I've made friends who value me for my company, my conversation, my perspective, not for what I can give them, materially. Family isn't about blood, I've learned. It's about respect, love without conditions or price tags. Zenaya visits weekly, bringing gossip and pastries from the bakery I love. Milos and I have dinner every Saturday, taking turns cooking or trying new restaurants in town. Carlos brings me tomatoes from the garden. Margaret loans me books she thinks I'll enjoy. Elaine has convinced me to try yoga, despite my arthritic knees. This is my family now chosen, rather than born into. Built on mutual care rather than obligation or exploitation. It's not what I expected at this stage of life. Not the future I planned when Henry and I sat on our porch discussing retirement, watching Mark play with his children on our lawn. But it's a good life, a life with dignity and purpose. At 78, I'm finally living for myself, painting my days in colors of my own choosing. The canvas of my remaining years is mine to fill, not just a background for others' desires, but a work of art in its own right, vibrant with possibility and rich with hard-won wisdom. Each morning, as the sun rises and light floods my east-facing windows, I set up my easel, select my brushes, and begin again. Stroke by stroke, choice by choice, I reclaim my life, my worth, my joy. And in that act of creation, I find a freedom I never knew was possible. The freedom to be fully, unapologetically myself. It's never too late to start over. What new beginning are you contemplating? Subscribe to Tales for Her for more inspiring stories of resilience and transformation. If Vivian's journey touched you, please share this story with someone who might need its message of hope and self-reclamation.